Some warnings are only ever given once. A father gave his son exactly one, on the only morning that mattered. Fly too low, and the sea will soak your wings. Fly too high, and the sun will end them. He listened, right up until the moment the whole sky opened up beneath him. This is the true story of Daedalus and Icarus, and the wings that were never meant to fly quite that close to the sun. Not long after a hero named Theseus walked out of an inescapable maze alive, King Minos of Crete finally learned exactly how he'd managed it. A single ball of string. A trick so simple it embarrassed him. And there was only one man on the island clever enough, and close enough to his daughter, to have thought of it. Daedalus was the finest craftsman Crete had ever known. He had built the labyrinth itself, a puzzle so perfect that even soldiers sent to search it never fully mapped its corridors. That same brilliance was exactly what made his betrayal unforgivable. Minos didn't banish him. He decided, instead, to keep him. By nightfall, the order had already been carried out, and the man who built the world's most famous prison found himself locked inside a much smaller one of his own. Daedalus and his young son, Icarus, were marched to a tower on the island's furthest cliff, and the door was sealed behind them before the sun had even fully set. A king who controlled every ship in every harbor, and every road on the island, didn't need chains. The sea and the land themselves were the cage. For days, Icarus paced the small room like something wild and newly caged, while his father sat very still, and thought. Every plan a clever man could imagine, Daedalus had already imagined, and dismissed. No ship would take them. No road would hide them. It was Icarus who noticed it first, actually. Not the walls. Not the locked door. The window. Gulls wheeled past it constantly, close enough to touch, riding the wind along the cliff face without a single guard so much as glancing up at them. Minos ruled every ship on the water, and every soldier on the road. But even a king as powerful as Minos had never once thought to guard the sky. Daedalus had spent a lifetime studying how things were built, levers, pulleys, an arch that could hold up a roof for 1,000 years. He had simply never studied a wing. Daedalus watched those gulls for a long, quiet while, and slowly, an old craftsman's mind began doing what it did best. A cage built of stone couldn't be climbed, or picked, or broken. But it could, Daedalus realized, be flown straight out of. Every morning after that, father and son gathered whatever the gulls and gannets left behind on the windowsill, loose feathers, small at first, then larger. Not every feather would do, though. Daedalus tested each one between his fingers, discarding anything too brittle, too small, or too worn by wind and salt to trust with a boy's life. What his son saw as play, Daedalus saw as material, hundreds of feathers, sorted largest to smallest, laid out in careful rows across the floor. For thread, they unraveled their own worn clothing. For a binding that could hold it all together against the wind, Daedalus turned to something sweeter, beeswax, softened slowly over a small guarded flame. Feather by feather, Daedalus built 2 enormous wings, each one curved exactly like a real bird's, largest feathers at the center, smallest at the tips. He melted wax along each seam, pressing every feather into place with hands that had built palaces, statues, and an entire inescapable maze, and never once anything like this. He measured the span of each wing against his own outstretched arms, and then, far more carefully, against his son's smaller ones, adjusting every single row to fit. Icarus wanted to help with everything, and mostly did, though his father quietly refixed a few feathers once his son had wandered off to chase another one out the window. Weeks passed this way, feather by feather, until one morning, 2 full sets of wings lay finished across the workshop floor, catching the light like something no mortal hands should have been able to make. Before either of them strapped on a single feather, Daedalus knelt down and made his son promise him one thing, and only one thing. Fly the middle course, always. Too close to the sea, and the spray would soak the feathers heavy, and drag him under. Too close to the sun, and its heat would melt the wax to nothing. Stay near me. Watch me. Fly exactly where I fly, and nowhere higher, and nowhere lower. Icarus, wide-eyed and already halfway distracted by the wings on his own back, promised. Daedalus believed him completely. He was, after all, still just a boy who had spent weeks chasing feathers out of windows for fun. Daedalus had built 100 things in his life that never once frightened him this much. This was the first invention he had ever made that his own son's life would depend on completely. The night before they planned to leave, Daedalus tested his own wings alone, in the dark, where no one but the moon would see him fail. He stepped off the edge for exactly 3 heartbeats, felt the wind catch and hold him, and landed again, hands shaking, utterly certain for the first time that this could actually work. He said nothing about it to Icarus the next morning. Some fears, he decided, a father simply carries alone. They climbed to the very top of the tower together, 2 sets of borrowed feathers catching the early wind, and looked down at a drop that would have terrified anyone with better sense. Daedalus went first, stepping off into open air with his heart somewhere in his throat, and for one long terrible second, simply fell. Then the wind caught the wings properly, and he wasn't falling anymore. He was flying, actually flying, for the first time in the history of anyone. Icarus didn't wait to be told twice. He leapt after his father into open air, and felt his own wings catch the wind on the very first try. Below them, palace guards on their morning rounds looked up, and up, and up, and simply stopped walking entirely. Word would reach King Minos himself by midday. 2 men, or perhaps 2 gods, had flown clean out of his most secure tower without leaving so much as a scuff mark on the door. Nobody had thought to warn Icarus about the other danger, not the sea, not the sun, but simply how impossibly, dangerously joyful flying would feel. They soared out over the open water, past fishing boats whose crews dropped their nets entirely to stare, past small sunlit islands scattered like stepping stones across the sea. He laughed out loud, an enormous unguarded sound, the first truly carefree thing he'd done since the tower door sealed shut behind them weeks earlier. For a while, he flew exactly where his father flew, wingtip to wingtip, exactly as promised, drinking in a view no living person had ever seen before. But the higher they went, the smaller the world below looked, and the bigger, and warmer, and more wonderful the open sky above him looked in return. Icarus began climbing. Just a little at first, testing how high his own 2 borrowed wings could carry him, well within what felt like reason. He glanced back once, just once, to see his father still flying the safe middle course far below, and felt something he'd never quite felt before, certain he knew better. Daedalus called out behind him, the same warning as always, and Icarus heard it, and meant to listen, right up until the wind and the height and the sheer joy of it all quietly drowned the sound out. Higher felt like flying better. Higher felt like proving something. Higher felt, for one glorious reckless minute, like the whole sky belonged entirely to him. The sun was closer now than any bird, any cloud, any living thing had ever flown. And the wax that held every single feather in place had begun, quietly, to soften. The first feather came loose so gently that Icarus almost didn't notice it spinning away below him, catching the light like a falling star. Then a second. Then several at once. And Icarus finally understood, with a lurch far colder than the warm sun around him, exactly what his father had tried to tell him. He beat what was left of his wings as hard as he possibly could, reaching for a father who was already turning, already diving, already too far below to reach him in time. And then, quite suddenly, and without any sound at all, he simply wasn't there anymore. Daedalus called his son's name until his voice gave out entirely. Only the wind, and a few last feathers settling gently onto the water, answered him back. Icarus was gone, simply gone, swallowed by a sea that from that day forward, sailors would only ever call by one name, the Icarian Sea. Daedalus circled that stretch of water for a long, long time, calling a name the sea had no intention of answering. The finest craftsman alive had built wings sturdy enough to escape a king. He had never imagined he would need to build anything strong enough to hold on to his own son. With what was left of his own failing wings, he flew on alone, west across open water, until a green welcoming coastline finally rose to meet him. He landed on the shore of Sicily as a father with nothing left to carry but grief, and the small handful of feathers the sea had chosen to give back. Daedalus never flew again. Not once, for the rest of his long life. He carried his wings to the nearest temple instead, and laid them down for good. He gave them to Apollo, god of the very sun that had undone his son, not out of anger, but as a quiet promise, that this particular kind of flying was finished. The old craftsman went on building for the rest of his days, temples, tools, wonders that outlasted him by thousands of years. But he built no more wings. His name outlived him too, in its own quiet way. To this day, the word Daedal still means something skillfully, wonderfully made, a small, lasting echo of the man who built wings out of feathers and grief. And the sea that took his son still carries that name today, on maps drawn thousands of years after every person in this story had turned to dust, the Icarian Sea. Ollie doesn't think this story is really about wax, or feathers, or even flying, when you get right down to it. It's about the difference between a warning and a rule. Icarus never meant to break either one. He just got caught up in how good it felt to be free, and forgot, for a few golden minutes, that his father's warning was love, wearing the shape of instructions. The middle course is rarely the most thrilling one. It's just the one that gets you all the way home. And Ollie says our next story belongs to a king who got exactly what he wished for, and discovered far too late that it was very much the wrong wish, a king named Minos, and a touch made entirely of gold. Thank you so much for watching this sixth tale in our Greek mythology series. Until next time, keep watching, keep wondering, and we'll see you back on Mount Olympus very soon.